What if I told you that Oscar Piastri's McLaren was manipulated from within the team in the middle of the fight for the championship? What if the glitch that left him without options in Abu Dhabi was not a mistake, but a premeditated decision? Stick around, because what you're about to hear could be one of the quietest but most revealing scandals in the paddock. Abu Dhabi, last classification of the year. Everything at stake. Oscar Piastri enters the track in Q3, knowing that every thousandth is critical. It is a circuit where margins are narrow and the slightest technical error can mean several lost positions. From the outside, Oscar's return seemed clean, precise, with the surgical style that characterizes him. But when they cross the finish line, time doesn't add up. It wasn't competitive. And then, over the radio, the Australian sends a message that will go unnoticed by many, but that marks the beginning of something bigger. The car does not respond. It has no bite. It is loose at the back. Something is not right. Those words hide more than they show. The bite of the front axle, the ability of the front axle to anchor the car at the apex of the curve, is vital at Yas Marina, where right-angle corners punish any weakness in the front suspension or setup. Piastri felt that the car was not turning as it should, as if the steering was disconnected from the chassis. Added to this was an even more worrying sensation. The rear axle seemed to float, detached from the track in the curve exit phase, especially when attacking the curbs, where stability must be maximum. The most disturbing thing is that the team, instead of panicking or starting an immediate review of parameters, responded normally. Everything seemed okay, according to the telemetry. No red data, no critical alert. That can only mean two things. Either the car was truly within parameters and the problem was in the driver's perception, or, what would be much more serious, the telemetry that the team was reviewing did not correspond to what was really happening on the track. A data discrepancy, a data pollution, as engineers call it. A contamination of information that is even more dangerous than a technical failure, because it hides the real problem and deceives the pilot, leaving him alone in the middle of the classification. What Piastri was sensing was a structural imbalance. Not a mechanical failure, not an obvious breakage, but a much more complex phenomenon. The interaction between different settings, engine maps, suspension parameters and tire temperatures that, combined, created erratic behavior. It was as if the car was perfectly assembled, but configured for another driver. And in that moment, in the heart of Q3, Oscar knew it. I was fighting something invisible. A rival who was not on another team, but perhaps in his own garage. And that's where it all began. That turn that should not fail, that car that should not betray him, did. And the worst thing is that no one believed him. The true origin of the problem that Oscar Piastri experienced in Abu Dhabi was not visible to the naked eye. It wasn't a reliability failure, or a defective part, or even the kind of human error that teams quickly recognize. It was something more insidious, more silent. It was a contaminated setup. And that, in modern Formula One, can be worse than any engine failure. On his lap during Q3, Oscar reported something disconcerting. His soft tires were not waking up. They did not generate the expected grip, neither in braking nor in traction. At first glance, it seemed like a common problem with a poorly managed thermal window. But the anomaly went beyond that. According to various leaks from the paddock and sources close to the McLaren environment, what Oscar felt was a behavioral inconsistency so marked that it could not be explained solely by driving style or differences in track preparation. To understand the seriousness of the matter, you have to know how Pirelli tires perform in qualifying. Each compound has a specific temperature window in the case of soft ones, extremely narrow where it offers maximum grip. Leaving that window even by 2 or 3 degrees means losing vital tenths. And here the management of the thermal blankets, the inflation pressure and the heating procedure from the garage comes into play. According to technical sources, Oscar's tires could have gone out on the track with a slight variation in the ideal tire temperature. Not enough to be illegal or raise suspicion, but enough to affect the way the compound reached its optimal temperature during the outing lap. While Norris could activate his tires in half a sector, Oscar needed a lap and a half. And in qualifying there is no 2.5 turns. There is 1 spot. This would explain why Piastri could not attack the first sector as he should. His car was skidding at the entrance to the curve, he couldn't find traction at the exit, and by the time the tires began to warm up, the lap was already lost. The difference was not in their talent, but in the pre-treatment of their tires. But there is another level to this story. Because even if the thermal management was correct, as the team will defend, there is still doubt about the inflation pressure. In modern F1, tire pressures are adjusted with surgical precision, and a minor variation can radically change the balance of the car. A few tenths more pressure increases stability in a straight line, but eliminates lateral grip when cornering. A few tenths less can give better traction but compromise durability. If more conservative pressures were applied to Oscar, perhaps to avoid blistering or control degradation, they automatically left him outside the window of pure performance and classification. This may seem minor, but in a scenario where the car was already compromised by a contaminated setup, these small decisions end up sabotaging any attempt at a fast lap. And the worst thing is that there is no way to prove it publicly. Because each of these adjustments can be justified as a strategy, as protection, as operational precaution. On paper, everything seems correct. On the runway, the pilot is left unarmed. What Piastri experienced that Saturday in Yas Marina was a perfect storm. An unbalanced car, a configuration that was not its own, and tires that did not obey it. All on a stage where he was supposed to shine. But the darkest thing is not the result. It is the possibility that someone planned it this way. This is where the sports narrative becomes a possible internal intrigue. Up to this point, everything could be explained by a combination of technical errors, piloting differences, or simple bad luck. But there is a line that is crossed when the accumulation of irregularities no longer seems accidental, but calculated. And that line was crossed in Abu Dhabi. Because what you are beginning to hear in the corridors of the paddock are not rumors of failures, but whispers of sabotage. But the problem is not just configuration. The car, being so aerodynamically efficient, also depends on perfect airflow behavior under the ground. Any difference, even subtle, in flatbed flex between one chassis and another can modify the way ground effect is generated, completely altering high-speed stability. That is, two McL39s can appear identical, but behave radically differently if one of them has a tolerance outside the ideal limit. And this is where Piastri's story takes on an even more complex dimension. Because if it started from a configuration derived from Norris's car, but with structural differences in its own chassis, then the result was inevitable. A machine designed to perform in millimeter conditions, unbalanced from the beginning. And in an environment like Abu Dhabi, where the latter sector requires progressive traction and surgical response to turning, that small imbalance becomes an impossible barrier to overcome. The irony is that all this speaks well of McLaren's technical work. They have created an extremely fast car, yes, but also extremely delicate. A car that responds like a scalpel in expert hands, but can become a double-edged sword if adjusted without understanding its sensitivity. And when that level of complexity intersects with questionable internal decisions, the result is a perfect storm. Oscar Piastri not only fought against a car that was difficult to tame. He fought against a design that does not tolerate improvisation or copy-pasting of setups. The McL39 is a surgical precision machine. And that precision, poorly managed, can destroy a pilot's performance, without anyone having to lift a finger with malicious intent. What happened to Oscar Piastri in Abu Dhabi qualifying was not a simple drop in performance. It was a complex situation woven by multiple layers of technology, internal politics, strategic management, and perhaps, some say, covert manipulation. An anomaly that began with imprecise sensations behind the wheel, continued with telemetry that did not reflect reality, and ended with an inexplicably lackluster performance for one of the championship's most consistent talents. And the most alarming thing of all is that, to date, there is no official explanation. There was no public review of the car. No technical note was issued. No one in charge offered a specific justification. The silence was absolute. And in Formula One, when silence covers everything, it is usually because the answers cannot or should not be said out loud. That leaves us with an uncomfortable question. Was Piastri the victim of a string of unforced errors at the most critical moment of the year, or was he necessary collateral damage in a larger plan to protect a championship narrative around Lando Norris? What we do know is that in modern F1, performance is not measured only on the stopwatch. It is also measured in the influence that a driver has within his team, in the trust he receives, in the degree of independence he is allowed to have over his own setup, and in how much his technical environment is willing to protect his interests even when he is not leading the championship. Leave me your opinion in the comments what you think about all this.